Subscribe to Feminism in India for your dose of intersectional feminist content and make sure to hit the bell icon to get all the latest updates.
Hi everyone, I'm Nishtha,
And I'm Pragya.
and we're your hosts for the podcast Intersectional Feminism, Desi Style, brought to you by Feminism in India. Before we begin with today's episode, we regret to inform our listeners that we've gone slightly off course from our schedule, and while there was another episode slated for today due to unforeseen circumstances, that one fell through. But don't worry, we will be back with that episode very soon. So, what is it that we're talking about today? Well, as feminism in India, one thing that keeps coming back to us, and one thing that we frankly never get tired of speaking about, is how feminism is political. So, this one's for you. Yes, all of you who comment on our post saying, but what does this have to do with the feminist movement? Guess what? Today we're going to explain how everything has something or the other to do with the feminist movement.
Oh, I loved the accent that you just did about what is it? I don't know, you went. Why is this political? Why are you talking about politics? Talk about feminist issues, no? Yeah, we usually get those kind of trolls, yes, a lot of them. And it's not just that. I think feminists all over the world and across time have to continuously prove the relevance of the feminist movement. India ho, west ho, kahin par bhi ho, it's it has been this has been such a big theme, for feminists to continuously prove that minority rights matter, that women's rights matter, that equality matters, and not just to the right wing as such. A lot of liberals don't associate with the movement because they think that it isn't as, say, mainstream or political enough. And it feminist movement is something that some women just do as like a part-time thing. That's usually what it's thought of by a lot of people, and even, like I said, even liberals. Say for example, I have been told by a lot of cishet men that they are feminist, but have hardly seen them engage with the movement. I mean, why else would you not find cishet men working in our sector, right? And why do we not find cishet men in our women's studies classes? Because they do not think that the feminist movement is something to pay as much heed to, say, as much as politics or economy. So as I carry these frustrations in my heart, Nishtha and I today are going to talk about why the hell feminism is political.
So yeah, I completely agree that there are so many this one term that you've coined, no Pragya, this whole part-time feminist thing, I think is amazing. Like, because it's so apt with what we've heard, and I think we're going to be damn salty in this episode. But there are people who are like, we'll share a post about, say, something as relevant as, say, the farmers protest, or the CA-NRC movement, anti-CA-NRC movement, when it was happening earlier last year. And people will be like, "हाँ, we are feminists, but इसके बारे में कुछ मत बोलो." तो we're like, तो फिर are you sure you're a feminist? But ठीक है. Um, no, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think the crux of the issue that really boils down to, and that's something that I've really understood a lot more in depth, of course, through the course even of this podcast, now that we're nearing the end, is that you take any issue, literally any issue in the world, and we've picked up things like disability rights. We have picked up presence in the digital space. We've picked up journalism, and you will find that almost everything can and does have feminist undertones. So it really becomes, I keep going back to this one episode that we had with Nidhi Goyal, which was on disability rights, where she spoke about how, why is it that you take a person with disability and you reduce their entire identity to just being about that disability? Why is it that they are not given equal opportunity to talk about something like economics or sports? And often at times one finds that that's the same thing that's happening with feminists as well, right? You will not hear us, March may will be called to all of these panels because it'll be Array Women's Month hai and International Women's Day hai. So you come and you speak, and for the rest of the month, like for the rest of the year, our opinion is like, Array, but there is a Women's Month. No, so you can speak in the Women's Month. No, which is bizarre. Like, why would that be something that would be a valid thing? It's really, really not. And then more so, this I think also becomes a question of how we really look at politics. Like, what is politics? Do you think it's just about the political parties that exist? Because that's really not the case. At the end of the day, politics is about governance. It's about policies that affects the life of every citizen. And women are equal citizens. So how can we completely divorce our fight for justice and our fight even for survival many a times as to be something that's away from policy and governance, right? So, and then one when one talks about things like policy and governance, and one talks about those who quote unquote are in power, which of course power in itself is like a very different kind of realm to get into. But for the lack of a better term and for popular understanding of the word, for those who are in power, it becomes then very important also to look at, oh, how many women are in power right now? How many women are actually directly impacting the sort of decision making that percolates into all of our lives? And despite whatever numbers and figures may be thrown at us as brownie points and token points, ki, oh, dekho, but 50 years ago it was just this many women and now it's this many women. I mean, we're still struggling to get women equal representation. This is when cis women are more privileged than most people in society. To talk about gender minorities and sexual minorities is just like a whole other ball game in itself. So I think it becomes then very important also to talk about how even politics in our country up until now is so um hegemonically male dominated, and even today is understood in terms of hegemonic masculine power. Like, politics hai to it's a bahubali. I can say a lot about this, but we actually spoke to our Hindi associate editor Ritika, who really breaks it down for us well, both in terms of concept as well as in terms of numbers, honestly.
Politics have always been male dominated, and it is in all terms, from electoral politics to even the discussion of politics. You know, politics needs to be seen with an intersectional lens, right? And that is where our political system fails us. If we take the example of our own country, which is a very, very diverse country, but when we look at our lawmakers, MPs, MLAs, political parties, you don't see the same diversity, right? We don't need to go to history. Our country's political system is highly, highly dominated by upper caste and upper class men with no or little representation given to minorities, STs, SCs, sexual or gender minorities for that matter. Political parties prefer giving tickets to Muslim kind figures, which we in our local language call Bahubali. And you know why? Because these parties assume such candidates to have more winnability. Which candidate has how many criminal cases registered against him is regarded as brownie points in our country. And at the same time, when a ticket is given to some woman candidate, the news pig runs around the color of her attire, her marital status, etc. etc. If we talk about gender and politics, then speaking from personal experience, if you are a woman with strong political views, you'll often face two things, mansplaining. Oh, wait, I know this better. And benevolent sexism. Oh, you have such a good understanding of politics. So, yeah, even if we are in 2021, our politics is still male dominated. That's why still we just have one single woman chief minister in our country as vast and diverse as India.
I think Ritika pointed out so many important things that summarizes what it is like to for a woman to be in the mainstream political sphere, because how many women prime ministers have India had, or how many say party leaders do we see? And even if there are women leaders or party members, they face sexism on an everyday basis. Like, there are so many accounts of women who had to raise their voices up in the parliament because they were being toned down or tone policed by other male members. And I think what the right wing, left wing, or the middle wing finds in common is the misogyny against all its women leaders and members. And I do not want to say that women haven't perpetuated the same misogyny, but that too is induced by patriarchy. And even after so many years, this has not changed. So when Ritika mentions that the mainstream politics was male dominated, it is very true. And even after so many years, we still see such poor representation of women. Even though it has been so many years of democracy, America has only now found its first female vice president, and never a female president. So it's so problematic in that sense. And but you know what? The feminist movement did try to make its interventions. When it started in the West or in India, it literally started on demands for mainstream political rights, like the right to vote for women. And we have Soumya now, who's the community editor at FII, to speak a little bit more on this.
The feminist movement is fundamentally political, and well, nothing explains it better than say how the voting rights was one of the first demands, that were ever put forward towards empowering women. I'm talking about the suffrage movement. So it was a fight that went on for decades in the US, as women continue to demand for the right to vote. When we talk about India, when India implemented the 73rd and the 74th Amendment Act in, I think, 1992, it was to ensure one-third seats for women in panchayat elections. Now, again, this was important because women in the rural areas predominantly could hope for their personal issues to get represented politically. This was especially important because of increasing cases of alcoholic husbands and resultant domestic abuse. And then it became truly important for women to gain political representation, because with that came the power to at least initiate change. Again, this does not mean that the feminist movement does not encompass social, economic, and individual aspirations of gender minorities as well, but gaining a political footing has always been a significant first to achieve the rest.
You know, Samya brought up a really interesting point, and that's something that I definitely agree with. That literally the basis of this movement was asking for political rights. And now, if we were to actually like move on and think about things like where and how it's expanded and broadened its horizons, I think that's where a lot of resistance that feminism faces comes down to, because people are not willing to see the evolution within the movement. For them, it's still about, oh, now you have voting rights, and you have, women are getting an education, and women are getting being allowed to work, whatever the hell that means. So that's okay, like that's a feminist issue, and now you can just like stay within this little realm. So it's again this idea of trying to box issues and trying to segregate them and compartmentalize them and be like, this is a woman's issue, this is a man's issue, this is not anybody's issue because the state has said that you can't talk about this. Please don't arrest me. So now, of course, one needs to understand that that's not how any movement works. It does adapt and evolve and encompass things as soon as it sees it. For instance, take for example, say the Dalit feminist movement. Like we keep saying again and again and again, and like honestly, intersectionality has now sort of been like, if you open my brain, you'll see intersectionality tattooed on it, because that's how relevant and important it is. One cannot take away from the fact that a Dalit feminist's experience is will be very different to mine. One can't take away from the fact that they'll be fighting against both sexism and casteism, and in that way one cannot divorce the conversation around Dalit rights from what feminism is essentially trying to achieve. And it has now gone ahead, the feminist movement has now broadened to a space where it's gone ahead to encompass other minority movements. Such as, say, the farmers movement that's going on. We went to Singhu border and we spoke to so many women farmers who were present there, and their concerns, what was bothering them was, unique in its own way, and it needed to find a space within the movement. Take the queer movement, for example. When we talk about sexual rights and health rights and reproductive rights, on the one hand you say that, oh yes, women need to have autonomy over their body and they need to be well aware of what their sexual and reproductive rights are. But does that same privilege not be can will that not be extended to trans people? Is that solely something that only cis people have right over or have access to? Of course not. The way that we even speak about sexual and reproductive health, the language is always cis heteronormative, and that's something that the feminist movement recognizes, that, oh, it's not necessarily just women bleed or women give birth. Trans men can also bleed, trans men can also give birth, non-binary people can bleed, non-binary people can give birth. So if we're trying to create an inclusive, that's the word that I was looking for, if we're trying to create an inclusive environment, one cannot be inclusive by saying that, oh, I'm only going to look after one section of society, and that's the limit to which my inclusion will go to, and I'll be like semi exclusionary but consider myself above everybody else because, oh, at least I'm not as bad as, say, somebody who's in patriarchy. It doesn't work like that. You can't pick and choose that, okay, this is what I want to talk about and this is who I don't want to talk about. If feminism is about equality and justice, it needs to be about equality and justice for all. Like most other things, feminism is also based on power relationships. You have somebody who's dominating and somebody who's being oppressed. And these power relationships, they do not necessarily always confine themselves only to the domestic sphere or the private sphere. They really do seep into every single aspect of our life. The one thing that we keep hearing is that the personal is political. A very simple example why I feel a higher sense of responsibility in the day to day towards my family or my parents as compared to, say, hypothetically, of course, as compared to, say, my brother, would be because at first you may argue that, oh, that's just who he is and that's just who you are and that's just the way that things are. But if one really were to dissect, say, the upbringing that two siblings may be getting in the same house, the kind of socialization process that literally the same people bringing up two other people may be giving to them, one then realized that there are some differences that have seeped into the way that we function as in something as private as, say, even a nuclear family unit. So one really can't divorce any aspect of our life from the political. And we spoke to Japleen Pasricha, our founder, director, and CEO, to elaborate and throw a little more light on this entire concept.
I find it very amusing when people ask us, oh, why are you talking about politics? Why are you talking about something that has happened in Kashmir? Or why are you talking about the farmers' protests or the anti-CEA, NRC protests? Like, stick to women's rights. And this is a comment that we at FI receive literally almost, I think, every day. And it's amusing and also annoying how people think that feminism is completely divorced from politics. Funny because the second wave feminist movement actually, that's when the phrase was coined, the personal is political, in the late 1960s, and where feminists recognized that feminist activism or women's rights activism cannot absolutely be divorced from politics. So I would just like to say, like, how we say that gender is everywhere. It's in the clothes that you wear, or the food that you eat, or how you behave in a public space versus a private space, how you sit, like how women are always trained to sit with their legs closed, or the way you laugh. Women's laugh is policed, that you shouldn't laugh too loud because that's a very masculine way to laugh and not a feminine way to laugh. Similarly, politics is everywhere. It's again what we wear, what we eat, the reason why somebody is born as a vegetarian, like they have been brought up as vegetarians, that's political, because the whole concept of especially in India, where being vegetarian is very closely linked to one's caste status, and how being vegetarian also equates to being pure, like how we see on these restaurants pure vegetarian. Like I've never seen somewhere where it says pure non-vegetarian or pure meat eaters. So all of these are very political things, and we may not see them because it may look mundane, and it may look like, oh, this is just a everyday. Or a lot of people come up with this excuse of, oh, it's somebody's choice, but I don't think that it's a choice, because I mean, it is, yeah, yes, it is a choice, but it is a political choice, even if that person may not understand that they are, when they say that, my religion doesn't allow me to eat meat, or my caste doesn't allow me to eat meat, they are making a political choice. Or when I as a feminist activist talk about that my feminism is very much contextualized in the country's politics, it is me making a political stand, and also saying very directly where I stand on a lot of issues. So I honestly do not think that feminism can be divorced from politics, especially when we're talking about power relationships. Even within the feminist movement, there are many, many power relationships and power hierarchies. And as feminists, it is important that we not just recognize the politics outside of our movement and what is happening in our socio-cultural economic context, but also the power relationships within the feminist movement, within upper caste feminists, upper class feminists, and uh, how the feminist movement has been called out by Dalit activists, by Dalit feminists, by trans feminists and activists on of it not being inclusive. And that is also about politics. It is, it does come down to who has more power. Yeah, so I mean, I would really suggest that anyone who still thinks that feminism is divorced from politics to do some basic reading and just evaluate their own life, and how what kind of privileges they have currently, especially in our current our current social political scenario, and really reflect on what is your caste location, what is your religious identity, and how that actually plays into the politics of your life, of how you are treated in the society, is very much decided by all of these identities that you hold. So honestly, if you still think that politics are not a part of your everyday life, you're just kidding yourself. That's all I have to say.
I completely agree with Jafleen, and I also have come to terms with the fact that we live in a patriarchy and almost all spaces are male dominated. Even if you see the private sphere as something, say, you typically relate with women, or we keep on hearing things like women belong to the private sphere, it is still controlled by men. And so this public private divide, or political, mainstream political, or and the personal political, these kind of dichotomies become futile at the end of the day, because patriarchy is everywhere. And it's not that women have more control over their households. Oftentimes we see, like Nishta mentioned, that women are subjected to various forms of violence, various forms of sexism, misogyny in the household. Women do unpaid work, they do care work. If they become parents, they have to take more responsibility. And now, if even if they're educated and they get employed, now they're expected to have a balance between the public and the private, where if they are working somewhere, they should be able to manage that also, but also mother their babies. To talk a little bit more on this, we have Mansi, the digital editor at FII, who will tell us that we are not homogeneous people, or we do not live with only one identity but multiple ones, and that our resistance, our movements are also multiple.
Feminist ideas literally impact what we understand as politics. Feminist activists have to fight for more inclusive laws and legislations, um, such as about abortion, about voting rights, reservations, citizenship, etc., because these affect the lives and livelihoods of women and other gender identities and any other minority groups. It's not like you are either a farmer or you're a woman, or you either come from a marginalized caste or you're someone who's gender non-conforming, because these identities overlap. So it's kind of ridiculous to think that you should stick to women's issues, because um, a woman is so many things. A woman is like, there's identities, there's layers to her identities, and so there's multiple things she has to fight for, because there are multiple ways that be affected by policies. So even policies or laws which seemingly, and they're not sticking to quote unquote women's issues, are going to seriously affect them. For example, the CAA is going to affect the citizenship of the citizenship status, or could affect the citizen status of Muslim women. And the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, I mean, yeah, broadly it's supposed to be about national security, and you're giving the armed forces, extra impunity for a reason, but it directly affects women when they are the ones who are being exploited, when they are the ones facing violence by the hands of the armed forces. And yeah, there's just so many things that we think won't affect women, but directly does.
Yes, Mansi, what you said about how we are not just one identity and multiple. I think we're just going to die, Pragya, going on and on and on about this. Like, that will be the end of us. But we've spoken so much about how feminism is political and needs to be viewed as something that's political. But then there's also this one very dangerous sort of notion, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm calling it dangerous, and I'll elaborate on why in a bit. Notion of people practicing feminism that's not political. So we have so many, there have been many times where we have called out problematic powerful women for having really um uh, distressing and problematic opinions on things. Say, take Kangna Ranaut for example. The fact that there is so much that she says which is unfair, which is derogatory. Her opinions on mental health are absolutely abysmal and such a blow to so much of the work that people are doing. And yet, when one calls it out, the one refrain that we sort of keep getting is that, oh, you're a feminist group but you're calling out women. I guess that just means that you believe in women's issues as long as they agree with your viewpoint. That's where this becomes very dangerous. The sort of idea that if there's a woman in power who's achieved something for herself, whatever she says must be taken as gospel. And this is something that I like to call the girl boss syndrome, which is a really fluffy, shallow form of feminism, which where I remember Pragya had said, you'd said something, Pragya, a little while ago in one of our episodes, where you had started believing that um, individual healing would not happen till community healing did not happen. And that is something that true feminism, really looks at. You can't have one woman who's in a position of power being a mouthpiece for patriarchy, and then when people call that woman out, or when people say that, oh, what you're saying is not fair, not correct, not right to many people, is truly an injustice to many people. People will come back and tell you, oh, look, this is a woman in power who's made it, and yet here you are calling her out. So are you really a feminist? Yes, we still are feminists if we choose to do that. And that I'm finding is increasingly becoming a problem with a very sort of glamorized, easy to consume form of feminism, which is like, yeah, you go girl and girl boss, and you know, but it, like, we really need to move beyond that in our feminism. Upliftment can't just be about individual people who've managed to sort of make a space for themselves. And while of course I'm not saying that that's not something that should be celebrated, that can't be seen uh, as like the end goal of feminism. It can't be about just one individual, or about a very capitalistic sort of view at feminism. How we even now see there are so many brands that are co-opting this space, say how pink washing happens, or how again there are brands that are talking about women's empowerment for really problematic things. Like I remember this one magazine cover example comes to mind, where there was like this new Bollywood starlet. I'm not sure who was on the cover, so I'm not going to take a name, but it was a starlet, and she was posing as an African queen or something. And she had people who, she had persons of dark skin who were like standing behind her as, um, I mean, slaves or something like that, and that was being sold to us as women's empowerment, and it's really not. So this sort of shallow, divorced from any other kind of context, any other social context feminism that's kind of crept also into our social media, is something that really becomes then more detrimental to the cause than anything else. We have Purnima, who's our content strategist, who's going to be also explaining what is her take on this sort of girl boss babe feminism wave that we've slowly seen emerging now, with uh, big corporations and companies trying to ride the wave of being woke.
The entire argument of feminism and politics being two distinct things that are in no way associated with each other is deeply flawed. Can there ever be apolitical feminism? Well, I don't think so. I think apolitical feminism would be an oxymoron. We have to understand that feminism stands for equal social, political, and economic rights for all. And that belief in itself is inherently political. So, how can we ever divorce social justice from politics? And when we do, like, what do we get? A superficial, boss babe, corporate style of feminism that will, yes, queen, its way out of privileged women getting more privilege, or celebrate capitalism, or celebrate instances of tokenism, but will not question the various structures of oppression, will not question structures of power, as it is a very convenient and comfortable situation to be in, right? For example, as a cis Savarna woman in India, it will be great if I don't talk about how my cis privilege and caste privilege influence my everyday lived experiences. But we need to understand that not only our feminism needs to be political, our feminism also needs to be intersectional, needs to understand how we experience oppression. So, I don't think there can be any such thing as apolitical feminism.
I think Purnima is absolutely right. And well, this episode was meant to tell you all how feminism is political. And I think we covered so many points. But what I also want our listeners to realize is that irrespective of whether feminists take up the burden of proving that feminism is political, or the political relevance of the feminist movement, it is still going to be inherently political. And if you want to be allies to the movement, what I would recommend is that don't be an ally half heartedly, or don't be an ally because you want to impress your girl. It's not a badge that you wear to a party, but it's a continuous resistance. It's a fight. It's an everyday fight for marginalized sections of the society. And for those people who have a problem with feminists talking about things like CAA, NRC, or farmers protests, or say even the budget, or anything of that sort, or even just the mainstream politics, I just want to tell them that we are still gonna do it no matter what. And feminism is inherently political, and politics should be inherently feminist.
And that very defiant, powerful note, which is how your feminism should be defined and powerful, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style. We are going to be back next to next week, which also happens to be Valentine's week, to make you feel more single than you probably are. But don't worry, Pragya and I will be joining you in that pity party as we talk about modern love and love that pushes all kinds of boundaries, especially in today's climate. We hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, we look forward to hearing whatever you may have to say about it. And do tune in next to next Thursday for our next episode. And thanks so much for listening in.